Game devs. We know that great gameplay is what players love, but integrating metagame features like challenges, progression, rewards is crucial for retention and monetization. However, coding them is a tedious and time-consuming process. That's why top studios have turned to Hero. Hero provides a complete suite of battle-tested metagame features that are quick to implement, letting you spend more time on the core gameplay experience. Ready to ship fully featured, engaging games? Check out Hero today by clicking the link below.
Attention app and game developers, are you ready to unlock the secrets behind the world's top-performing apps and games? With Sensor Tower, you get the ultimate competitive edge, whether it's breaking into new markets, fine-tuning your UA strategies, or boosting monetization. Dive into data like never before, track global trends across app stores, analyze market-leading in-app purchase and in-app ad strategies, and benchmark your performance with real-time insight. The best part, Sensor Tower doesn't just deliver data, it helps you turn it into action. With intuitive tools and expert analysis, it's everything you need to make smarter, faster decisions. Thousands of app and game studios, from indie creators to global giants, trust Sensor Tower to help them win. So why not you? Start your free trial today at sensortower.com. That is sensortower.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Deconstructor of Fun interview series. I'm your host, Jen Donahoe. So today I'm super excited. We're going to tackle influencer and podcast marketing. Yes, both are absolutely applicable for the game industry. I often say that influencer marketing has moved up to be like a top 3 tactic for the game marketers. While I haven't made a major TV ad in years, I spent a lot of time on influencer campaigns. So since tracking leaks can only catch about like 30% of the influencer campaign impact, I wanted to bring on 2 experts to give their experience and tips for crafting the best data-driven influencer and podcast campaigns, and maybe they'll even check me on those numbers. So here's what we're going to touch on today, and here are the topics. So the kinds of influencer and podcast marketing, there's actually more than you think. Setting budgets, setting OKRs, objectives and key results, data-driven methodology, and tracking organics, which is incredibly important. And they have some good benchmarks for how you look at the organic uplift of your campaigns. And then if we have time, some creative recommendations. How do you work with the influencers to get the best out of creative? So with that, I'm going to let them introduce themselves. I have 2 amazing experts. So first, Marion, you want to go first?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, Jen. It's a pleasure to be here. So hi, everyone. I'm Marion Balinoff. So I'm an influencer marketing consultant specializing in mobile games and apps. I basically spent the past decade scaling performance-driven influencer campaigns, working with studios like Social Point and Ruga, before launching my own consultancy. And now I help like top gaming companies like Supercell, Bytro, Snowprint Studio turn basically creators into a scalable user acquisition channel.
Yes, that would be an expert that I brought in. Holy crap. Marion, that's awesome. Sara, let's hear about you.
Yes, so thanks as well, Jen, to have me here today. So I'm Chief Growth Officer at Media Bodies, an influencer marketing and podcast agency. But previously I was at Social Point. I was as well at FunPlus and Bandai Namco, where basically I handled the growth of less conventional user acquisition channels, today becoming a little bit more conventional, let's say. So yeah, it's really a pleasure to be here today.
I love that you went to the dark side or the light side, however you would like to say it. So you sat in my seat and you were a marketer, a growth marketer. And I know that you worked on some pretty big IP as well when you were at Bandai Namco. I actually ran into you a couple of times, completely separate for this. And I was so impressed with you and what you've done. To hear now that you've gone to influencer marketing and podcast marketing, I was super interested to talk more about why you made the jump and what you're seeing in this side of things, especially being a growth marketer. So we'll get into that. But first, let's do a little table setting, a little definition. So influencers, podcast marketing, there's a lot of ways that people can talk about it. I've heard of like performance-driven, data-driven, creative and brand awareness. So you've got kind of the 2 buckets of things, nano-influencers, micro-influencers, verticals. So can you break it all down and just do like a little bit of table setting of what we're going to talk about today?
So there's different conceptions from what people consider micro-influencers, which can be, or nano-influencers. This can range like from 1,000 impressions to 50, 100,000, things like that. So in the end, it's very important that everything is aligned when we're talking with another person about influencer marketing or podcast marketing. So we basically establish all of these definitions beforehand. But even like concepts such as performance, right? So yeah, I want to drive influencer marketing because I want to drive performance. So performance can also vary a lot depending on the product and the game. So there's people that say performance, and then you suddenly realize that they are talking about impressions and brand awareness. And there's other people that say performance, and it's basically more towards ROI and installs, right? So yeah, I had like plenty of experience. I remember like back in the day talking to some talent managers that were considering giving all the pricing of the influencers by subscribers, right? Which is another consideration or definition that we should have in mind. How do you price this? Is it by impressions or is it by subscribers? And sometimes the OGs would price themselves through subscribers, but then they were big back in the day, but they're not big today.
Yeah.
The fierce competition of influencers. And so basically there's some stuff that definitely needs to be defined. And like, how do you want to price this? Nowadays, I would say definitely go by impressions and not subscribers.
Mm. And verticals, what that means is like automotive or food.
Yeah, exactly. So there's plenty of verticals that can vary from a niche range of topics. There's companies that want just to go like with fishing channels or like hunting or outdoor channels, things like that. So that would be the verticals. Or like there's more broad verticals like entertainment, which inside there could be like some sub verticals as well. And so those verticals are then going to as well give us, let's say, a script for when we want to run our campaigns and try it for the first time and try to as well understand and assess what are the verticals that are working or the topics that are working for our product, just to find the right lookalikes on the audiences. So basically testing, for example, some of these different type of verticals to see which ones bring the right performance for us.
And let me just ask you just a little bit about podcast influencer campaigns, because I know that's a little bit of your specialty now. So there are host-read ads, which is the host of it's actually what we do at Deconstructor of Fun. We read the ad. Then there are just the programmatic ads that go inside.
We can talk about both. So in the end, it's, different pricing. It's a different setup. But definitely when it comes to host-read, we have more creative freedom, let's say. We can give some guidelines and everything. But at the same time, I'd say when it's programmatic, of course, like there's a pre-recorded ad that also you can A/B test, for example, having different recordings, then you can test across different verticals. And so basically it will all depend on the product. What's the initial setup that you decide you want to do? And at the same time, the pricing, right? Because it's going to depend, like CPMs are not going to be the same either.
Got it. Cool. So let's shift over to talk about budget and setting objectives. I think the first thing I would always get pressure on is how much money are you going to spend on your influencers? What are your measurements? How are you going to prove success? So Marianne, do you want to talk a little bit about how you approach setting up budget and how you approach setting up your objectives?
Yeah, definitely. So the thing is that most of the time when I have clients coming to me and they want to start doing influencer marketing, they're like, well, either I have like a 30K budget and I want to test it, or they're like, okay, well, how much do I need to spend? And so the thing is that depending on your app, it's going to really vary, right? There's several things that are going to impact your campaign price. And so if you want to run like performance-driven campaigns, so let's say you want to measure the performance of your campaign, like the ROI, how many installs for your campaigns, your budget is going to all depend on the target markets that you want to target, obviously, the daily organic installs of your app. And you were pointing it before, Jen. Most of the traffic that you get is going to be organic, right? So that's why it's really, really important for your setup and the budget that you're going to spend to have this in mind, because otherwise you're never going to be able to measure your campaign performance, right? And so for me as a consultant, I always advise my client to aim for at least 25% more installs than the daily organics that they have in the targeted geo. So if I give you an example, let's say we want to target US, UK, Canada, Australia, so English speaking countries, right? Our app has 1,000 installs per day on average. If we aim at 25% more, that's 250 additional installs during the campaign period, right? Per day. So because we want to do performance, I would always advise you to YouTube. The reason for that is because you're going to have a link that is going to be directly in the description of the video. And on top of that, a QR code on screen. So that's going to help you track better the performance of your campaign. And so if you want your analysis to be as accurate as possible and conservative as possible, you want to only look at the campaign for the first 7 days, because that's where most of the views are going to be made within YouTube. I think it's like around 60% of the views are going to be generated within that time. And then it's going to really spread over time, obviously. And so what I usually do for all of my clients is that I calculate the campaign total installs that we need. So we said 250 installs during a campaign period, which is 7 days. So that's 1,750 installs that we want for this campaign, right? And then I make different scenarios, pessimistic, medium, and optimistic, based on different conversion rates. So giving an average, and it will depend from one game to another, from one country to another. But let's say for this example, we're going to be between 0.3 in the pessimistic scenario in terms of conversion rate from views to installs, to the optimistic scenario that is going to be 0.7%, right? And so the idea is that your pessimistic scenario at least generates the minimum numbers of installs that you need to be able to see that organic uplift in your installs, right? So in that case, we understand that basically we need 600,000 views for those 1,800 installs, right? Now, not that you understand how much traffic, like how much views you need to generate, then you'll be able to translate that into a budget, right? The cost of those views is going to vary depending on the influencers that you're working with, right? It's going to vary based on the social media. It's not going to be the same price for YouTube that it is for TikTok. It's going to depend obviously on the country, or the target audience. Male 18 plus audience is obviously cheaper than female 35 plus. And obviously the influencer vertical, as we were saying before, gaming is going to be cheaper than true crime, for example, or than family type of vertical. And so if we go back to the example, we were saying YouTube targeting English speaking countries, targeting, let's say, female 35 plus, working in certain verticals like cooking, lifestyle, DIY. And we know like this is going to be $50 CPM on average. This CPM, you can have it obviously working with the different agencies that you work with for influencer marketing, asking your peers that are also doing campaigns, and you can understand what's the average CPM. And then it will help you translate that into a minimum spend for your campaign, right? So 600,000 views at $50 CPM, that's $30K dollars that you will need to spend as a minimum for your campaign to be viable, right?
Love it. So if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify video, you get to see, Marion's kind of step through the whole process. So it sounds like 25% organic uplift is kind of a minimum for you. So look at your organic baseline, factor in that organic lift, use a low, medium, and high conversion percentage. So it sounds like you were, in your case, recommending 0.3 up to 0.7. I've done something very, very similar in my past. And that's kind of the approach that I use as well, is doing those types of scenarios, assuming a percentage. It sounds like your CPMs can range, $50 was your example. I've seen some as low as like 25 and high as 100. I think it just depends on your vertical, the game that you're looking at. And so that's pretty important for you, right? Is to go and kind of get an understanding of what your CPMs are, because it can be almost, in a sense, out of budget if it's too high. Yeah,
exactly. I have seen the craziest CPM out there for like family channels are asking like $200, $300 CPM. Yes, it's really crazy. Because then the problem is like if you work with an agency and then they work with managing company and then they work with the creator, obviously all of this adds to the cost. And so you end up with crazy CPM also because all of those influencers, for example, lifestyle, family, they work with a lot of brands that are not doing performance. And so in the end, they don't really care how much exactly do they pay, because they don't really have to prove at the end of the day that the campaign was ROI positive. So that really complicates. But one advice that I can give is that always negotiate prices. Like there is always room for negotiation. And many times I've seen like influencers or agent, I cut the price in half. So
okay.
Yeah. So don't hesitate and go all in.
Nice. So Sara, from your side, how do you think about organics? How have you approached setting your, in a sense, budget?
Yeah. So for example, like in addition to what Marion mentioned, this 25% of uplift, it's basically something that I guess it should be an uplift enough to cut through all the noise that the game is already generating through other activations that are not influencer marketing or anything else. So that being like UA spend fluctuation and all of these things. But then, of course, once you want to measure this 25% uplift or whatever that can be, it's important to have all of these things into consideration. As I said, like what other things are happening in your game at the same time. If it's your first influencer campaign or podcast campaign, do you want to, for example, try to isolate that from the rest of the things that you're doing in marketing? I would recommend, for example, a steady user acquisition, at least during 1 week before the campaign and during the campaign, to make sure that you can compare apples to apples and you're not generating extra noise that are going to complicate your analysis, right? And at the same time, if you want to try other channels at the same time, if you want to run influencer marketing or podcast marketing as well, as advice for the first time, try to isolate these two instead of running everything together. Once you have like a better understanding on how these type of campaigns perform for your game, then you can start potentially running them together because you will have already like a baseline for what's working or not working for your game. And that's going to give you confidence to keep running these campaigns. And of course, when it comes to the type of methodology that you can apply to calculate these organics, there's many questions out there. There's many people that are saying like, oh, should we look into store data or the MMP data, or how do we do it, right? I would say this is also one of the things that would need to be established before running any campaign inside the team, just to make sure that it's not just a test and then we will see what happens, but deciding what are the methodologies or how do we want to calculate the performance of the campaign in terms of organics. Do we want to account for that? Do we want to keep only the tracked installs, which I would advise there's always much more than tracked. So if you want to make the most out of it, let's go for organics as well. And then, do you have enough resources in-house? Do you have a data scientist that can help you with this, et cetera, et cetera? So one of the things, for example, could be just running like a simple uplift methodology where you're comparing what happened, let's say 4 weeks before the campaign and what happens during the campaign. And basically, if your organic daily installs before the campaign on average were 10 and all of the sudden during the campaign it's 15, well, you know that this 10 minus 15, it's 5. So basically, all the aggregated data, it's going to be the outcome of this organic uplift. But at the same time, there are other methodologies. There's something called causal impact. It's in Google's library, for example. So it's easy access as well for data scientists, where you can compare data across other countries. So countries where there's nothing going on, like with a lower baseline of installs, for example, and you don't run any other marketing activities, for example, as well, to see how you can move the needle with these campaigns. Or, for example, just to assess what would have happened. This causal impact as well tells you what would have happened in your metrics without the campaign. And basically, it compares what happened during the campaign and what would have happened without it. That gap, it's what then you can consider as what is your organic uplift.
Cool.
But of course, all of these things it's a previous conversation to have as well with your data scientist.
Okay. So number one is make sure you align on that with your team. Like, what are we going to use? Because there are many times I pick something and someone then argues with that methodology. So make sure you get alignment with your teams, especially whoever's counting the money and giving you the money. This is how we're going to measure it, and this is how we're going to show it to you. Then there's multiple ways. There's pre-post, which is in a sense a lift analysis. I think that's the hardest part, right? Is to the finance person who's like, this is bullshit. Like, what do you mean? Organic uplift. Oh, how do you convince the unconvincible?
Yeah, that's exactly what Sarah mentioned before. I think it's really, really important that everybody's aligned beforehand and that everybody embraces the fact that we're not going to be able to measure everything 100% accurately, right? Because as we said at the beginning, 20-30% of the traffic from the creator campaigns are going to be tracked. And so the vast majority of the traffic is not going to be. So as we said, like, we're going to have the link and then the QR code, which is going to help us track some of the traffic. We have different ways of increasing that share of tracked traffic, and we can talk about it a little bit later. But when you look at the performance, you're going to assume that the behavior of the users that were brought through the tracking link is going to be the same than the behavior of the users that came organically for each of the influencers individually, right? But the thing is that if you compare two influencers that on paper are exactly the same in terms of audience demographic, in terms of audience location, in terms of content, in terms of tone of voice, etc., you might have one that is a top performer and the other one that is really, really bad in terms of performance, right? So that's why it's really important for you to take a step back and not look at the performance only on a creator level, but more on a vertical level, right? And so basically, this is the type of tables that I do. So we have the vertical, we have the numbers of videos per vertical that went live, right? We accumulated the numbers of views that have generated each of those videos in each of those verticals. And then we look at the numbers of videos that have reached profitability in each of those verticals, right? To give you an idea, only 30% of the influencers that you work with are going to reach profitability, right? So to me, a good performing vertical is a vertical that has 30% of the videos that reach profitability or above, right? But then you want to have enough data to be able to make those conclusions, right? So to me, like the rule that I tend to follow is that at least have 10 videos in each of the verticals that I want to assess and at least have generated 500,000 views in each of those verticals, because that's going to give me enough confidence to assess whether or not those verticals are performing or not, right? And then what you want to do is for those verticals that might not have reached the 30% benchmark, you want to look into more detail and see if there's any way that you can improve the performance for this vertical to actually reach that performance benchmark. So that's when then you look at the same vertical, at the same numbers of videos per vertical, but then you want to look into the components of basically the ROI. So how much you pay the influencer, the CPM, what traffic it's generated from those vertical, the conversion rate, and then obviously the LTV, right? So the LTV, you know it from your game. It should be an average between your organic and your traffic and your paid traffic. Sorry. The CPM, you will know it from the agency that you're working with or from your peers that have launched other campaigns in the same markets with the same vertical, etc. And then the conversion rate, you can have your benchmark for your game and then also understand like benchmark from agencies and peers that you're working with, right? And so the idea is that, for example, if you take the example of gaming in that table, we've tested 12 videos. We have a really good CPM and we have a really good conversion rate. But in the end, the LTV is really bad. So that's typically the kind of vertical that I would stop working with because only 8% of the videos that were launched in this vertical did reach profitability. So it's very far off. And I know I'm not going to be able to impact the LTV that much. Like it just means the quality of the traffic that's coming from those gaming channels is not really good. Contrary, if we look at some verticals that might have some potential, we see a really good CPM, we see a really good LTV, but the conversion rate is actually not there. And so that's typically the kind of KPI that you can impact to increase your campaign performance, right? And there's different ways that we can do that I can explain, obviously. So you can have gift links and gift codes. This is typically the kind of thing that can really, really impact your performance. I would definitely advise testing different types of gifts, because what you think might appeal to an audience might not actually be something that really works. I would really look into, besides the ROI, look into other metrics such as retention, such as monetization, because obviously like some gift, for example, starter pack with loads of gems, it might actually cannibalize the early monetization. And even though conversion rate might increase, because yes, it's a starter pack that is very generous, then maybe your LTV, the LTV of those players is not going to be as high, right? So you want to find the right balance between something that is going to be appealing to new audiences. And the way to do that is usually to convert the value of this pack into a currency that they know. So let's have the influencers say, okay, this is worth $15. This is worth $20, right? And then obviously have the influencer mention until when this is available. Create a sense of urgency so people click the link, so then they're tracked and so they can get the reward in order for your campaign performance to improve.
Oh man, okay. You just dropped a lot. So let me break it down. So in the first section, what was amazing is you were showing a table, and I think the takeaway for people is to understand that you have to test different verticals. And then as you use your tracking links, you can measure how that vertical is performing against the other KPIs, right? How CPMs are performing, how conversion is performing, and obviously associate your LTV to that so that you can see within your campaign what's working and what's not. Where do you want to just say, now that let's drop that? And where do you see potential and where do you want to maybe even double down? So I like that methodology of utilizing how the tracking links are actually performing to understand that audience, so then you can, in a sense, have a proxy for how your organics are performing. Now, the second piece is how do you get them to click on that link? You know, the bane of our existence is it is so difficult to get people to actually click on the link. And I think you gave a bunch of different examples. Sara, what have you seen be successful? So let's kind of talk about like that tactics of how do you get people to track on the link? And by the way, is it the same even for podcasts too? So what tactics have you used in the past to incentivize players to click on the links? And then how might that be the same or different for podcasts?
Well, for podcasts, it's a little bit different. So it will depend on the type of ads that basically you have. So you can basically have a type of ad that it's in an episode dynamically. So it means that it can go to any episode from a podcast show, like the first episode to the latest. So basically it's dynamic. It means that this ad, it's going to disappear on time. So it will have just the length of the campaign. So with this type of ads, we can rarely put a tracking link. But then when it comes to baked-in ads, which is basically the ads that stay for a longer period of time, and it's usually in the latest episodes of a show, then we can ask the host to add and include a tracking link. But I would say for the people that are maybe probably more acquainted with the influencer marketing and more scared about podcasts, because probably it's a newer medium, I would say there's something in between that it's called simulcast, which is basically all the podcasts that can also be watched on YouTube, right? With that, we can include a tracking link. And it's basically very, very similar process than influencer marketing and what Marion just mentioned as well. So with that, it would be a way to incentivize in a much better way and much organic, because people are more used to see tracking links on YouTube, for example, than what they could do on a podcast website or things like that. So it's a really good in between when you know already influencer marketing and you want to start maybe podcast, to try simulcast the podcast on video, basically.
Yeah, the idea of a simulcast where, you get the benefits of both.
Exactly.
And so for podcast marketing, I know that, listen, I'm on a podcast. I listen to podcasts all the time. I know that from a host-read ad, I know if a host is going to read something, they at least have to believe in it a little bit, or else they wouldn't even do it. And so there's an authenticity. There's kind of like a recommendation in a sense that goes with it. What have you seen really work in podcast influencer marketing for some of the games that you've worked on? Has there been something that has really, been impressive for you?
Yeah, definitely. Something that we do now at Media Bodies is we're starting to do this creative performance report that it's purely based on how the ad is. And when we say how the ad is, it's like all the elements, right? Like from the length, from the tone of voice, the talking points, call to action, all of this. Gathering all these insights from different games, different clients that we have, we've seen that usually when the host is reading it in a very organic way, that it's really integrated into the topic of the podcast itself. So let's say you are a female 35 plus game that you want to encourage people to download the game because it's very relaxing and things like that. And then you're advertising on a true crime podcast, right? And so basically when the host lives it in a way where you encourage people to be like the personal experience from the host as well, right? Like for me, this is super good because as you know, we spend all day talking about these topics that are super heartbreaking. We're talking about true crime here. It's super dark. But then I come here and I relax and I play this game and it's amazing. So basically, when it feels organic in a way that the host can really share the personal experience, it's one of the strongest elements that an ad can have to drive better conversions and to sound more natural. And it's really something that we've seen as a common trend. So definitely we see that the sample size that we have, it's good enough to say this is something that is really valuable and that it's like that.
Yeah, the authenticity. I definitely feel that way when I personally listen, and it's great to hear that that's being successful for games.
Step into the future of game monetization with Guerola, the premier partner for game developers seeking to expand their reach and revenue. Guerola provides a robust suite of tools designed to enhance user acquisition, manage subscriptions, and streamline payment solutions worldwide. Unlock new markets and maximize profitability through their customized, secure payment architecture and dedicated support team. Guerola, powering game developers to achieve global success.
This podcast is brought to you by AppsFlyer. In today's digital world, understanding your app's journey from discovery to download is more than just insightful, it's essential. Enter AppsFlyer, the leader in mobile attribution and marketing analytics that allows you to measure the full potential of your marketing efforts, making every ad dollar work smarter. With AppsFlyer, that's your new reality. Dive deep into data-driven insights that reveal exactly where your users come from and how they'll interact with your app. AppsFlyer, where your app's potential meets performance. I know that you do both podcast marketing and regular influencer marketing, and Marion was giving a couple of great examples of gift links, QR codes, giveaways, starter packs. Have you seen anything else be successful on your side? Or, I mean, I know it depends is usually the answer, but what other tactics have you seen to get someone to hit click?
I feel like there's one very powerful tool that every marketer could try to do, and it's basically an integration with the game. So something that I've done back in the day at Social Point, as well at FunPlus, for example. For example, FunPlus, we had this, it was an entertainment influencer, and it was like, basically he was playing a pizza delivery guy in his concept of the video with the integration. And so what we did is like, we created him as an NFT in the game, and he was a pizza delivery guy. This was for State of Survival, so it's a zombie game. And like, basically encourage viewers to download the game because there's something related to their favorite influencer happening inside the game. It's definitely the incentive that I've seen that works the best. But not only this, like you can also try to capitalize, like in this case it was an NFT, but at Social Point, for example, we worked with MrBeast, and it was like creating like specific event in the game with his character, like a dragon where, you know, with MrBeast colors and all of this. And then that people basically could acquire either directly from the store or like completing an event, which helps with retention as well, things like that. And also easy to access this from new game users. So basically it's something that you don't have to complete like 50 levels to get to that point. So it also encourages the first-time user experience for early monetization.
Oh, awesome. So at one end, we have, very simple, please click on the link. On this other end is a really deep integration with an influencer, inserting them in the game, creating an event around them. I also have seen that be insanely helpful and beneficial. So there's a full range of different kinds of options. Another option that I've seen as well is one of my last podcasts was with a creator platform. So creator codes. So some games have the ability to have a SDK in the game, and Nexus.gg was the company I was talking to on the podcast a couple podcasts ago. And you insert a creator code, and then a player is incentivized when they see the video and the creator says, insert Jade Inferno, and they insert Jade Inferno in the game. They want to do that because they want their creator to get a cut of that revenue. And then you can easily, in a sense, track that in the game as well. So Marion, did we hit the list of all of the tactics? And you might have a slide or some other magic to show us, because this is, I think, some of the best advice we can give folks is you can't just throw it out there. Right? You can't just say, click on the link.
Yeah, you have to become more and more creative because there's so much noise there and there's so many people doing influencer marketing. Yeah, you have to become creative. The thing that Sara was mentioning, honestly, is by far my favorite type of campaigns because you get to work really closely with a creator, create something that's going to be tailored for the audience, that's going to really blend in the game or in the app that you're working with. And just to give you some numbers out of all the sort of integrations that I've done, and it can be really anything. Like we were talking about sort of characters, but it could be like in a word game, having like sort of tiles that are personalized. It can be a decoration item that is going to be related to the creator. And obviously you're going to have to sort of test the different methods that people can acquire those items. Either it's through playing the game in an event or directly through the shop, or ideally having both ways. So then you can really offer both possibilities, because you see some people that want to get anything that's related to related to their creators. And so they don't mind actually spending money right away to collect something. And so that's clearly the kind of users that you want to also collect. But just to give people an idea, out of all the collaboration like that I've done across different types of games, different types of creators, this can really impact the conversion rate, and it can increase it up to 400% on average. So from views to installs, so that's really massive. And then ROI overall on average was increased by 279%. So again, like it's really massive. It is going to require a lot of time internally. First of all, to pitch it to your product team, because that might not be easy, especially if you don't have numbers to begin with, but now you do. So that's great. It's going to be an easier conversation to align with the roadmap to see what can be done and what can we personalize. You don't have to go all in at the beginning, right? You don't have to create an entire event around the creator. You don't have to create assets from scratch. Maybe you can reuse something, change some colors, change the name of the asset or something like that, just to test and see how it can improve the performance to begin with. And then once you're more comfortable and you see that actually that's the right direction to go, then you can go all in and work with bigger creators that are obviously going to cost a lot more money, but then also, personalize more stuff in your game, right?
So these kinds of really deep integrations where the influencer becomes a chase item or an item for sale or part of the event, these are the ones that drove the 400% ROI.
Yes.
Was that? Yeah. So I was actually going to ask you how you pitch your product team, but you did a good job. Any other tips in pitching your product team?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously with those numbers to begin with, that's going to be a lot easier because when we did this at the beginning, like it was much harder to justify the cost. Something that you want to look into is try to see how much time it's going to require from your team internally and see for which size of creators it's going to make sense. For us back then, it was at least 1 million views, but then it could be more, it could be less, right? So that's something that you want to consider. One advice I would give, and that brings back quite bad memories, but we were working with Mr. Beast and the video was supposed to go live in December around Christmas. So we had created everything around the influence, themed around Christmas. And then we actually received a call from Reed, Mr. Beast manager, telling me that basically it was, I think 21st of December, I was almost on holidays. Everything was ready in game. And he tells me, look, like Jimmy, so Mr. Beast doesn't like the video, so it's not going to go live.
Oh.
And I'm like, okay, yes, 6-figure budget. It was really big. And in the end, I had to postpone everything. And so one advice if I can give to everyone is really don't tie your integration to any seasonal event because you never know what's going to happen, right? So make sure that it can be moved around, that you have some flexibility, that you have a plan B because it will happen, right? Like influences, unfortunately, are unpredictable. It happens. So just anticipate and try to see like all the possible scenarios so you can make sure that you have the minimum amount of work in case something changes, basically.
I feel your pain. I too have run into that very, very problem of, even on my side, not feeling like the video was accurate or they said something that, when I was working with Walking Dead, I remember doing a campaign and something that they said we had recorded with Robert Kirkman, and God, this is forever ago. And I think they used something that Kirkman didn't want to use, and then they didn't want to take it out. And it kind of comes to the brief in the contract is making sure, in a sense, you have approval rights. Hopefully you get 2 rounds of approval and you have the final say. Most influencers might be okay with that. A lot of the bigger ones will be like, fuck off. You don't get that. But I think something we didn't really talk about, and maybe we can transition to actually creative, is making sure you have a brief, making sure that you have things agreed to in your contract so that the creative can be amazing and be what everybody wants it to be. So anything in that area you want to touch on and give some tips?
Yeah, no, I think what you were mentioning about like the contract is really, really important. Also, like beforehand, make sure that everybody's aligned, including obviously the influencer, on like how are the items going to be obtainable, whether it is through the shop. If it's through the shop, like how much does it cost? Like, can then people keep it like a lifetime? Do they have it only for a certain time? Are you able to sell this item again in the future? Right. So all those things that you want to think about, like make sure that it's all set up beforehand, obviously. But then on the creative side, as you were saying, like obviously 2 rounds of approval, it's a must. Because sometimes it's kind of hard to get a hold of them and you don't always manage to have them on the call. And so what I did is like create some sort of form for them to fill so we could better understand and say, what are you comfortable with? What are your favorite colors? Like, so we have like a sit down internally with the creative team, with the product team, see what's the scope, what can we do, what can we offer? And then we gather this information through a Google form so to fill in and give us the right direction. And then obviously before actually putting too much work into the asset itself, sending like just a sort of draft, confirming that you're in the right direction, giving them a little bit of vision, making sure that this is all right, and then you move on to the next stage. But like have a lot of sort of back and forth like this, but that are timed, so you ensure that you don't end up like at the end of the process having to change some stuff.
No, really smart too. I like your Google Form idea. I like having things structured and templated so that you can really connect. And, we need to have empathy for them as well as business owners. This is their business. This is their personality and their tone and their image. And listen, at the end of the day, if the creative isn't authentic and organic, so to speak, it's not going to resonate with anybody. And so we want to make sure it's the best it could be. Sara, what advice do you have on this topic of creative or contracts or working with influencers?
One thing that I lived recently, it's like several gaming companies, like everyone is trying to release a new game this time. And basically having early stage conversations with a product that are already developing a game where nothing is set on stone, and basically that they already know that they want to work with influencers in the future if this game works, right? So I'm seeing like a common trend of product teams working towards a game that they can easily tailor to influencer marketing and to any type of integrations that is related to them. So basically anything that requires like short development time for a skin and things like that, this can be super easy, right? Like a skin, it's something that it can take like 1 week, right? And so you can easily activate these things. But of course, like anything that it's related to include this, for example, in the contracts. One thing that I've seen that it's super important as well is to try to avoid revenue share, because sometimes they might ask for it, right? I mean, I've seen this and I've tried to avoid it, like, because usually it's that with celebrities though, right? Like when you're working with purely celebrities and not influencers, they always want to have a revenue share, and that's something you cannot escape. But when it comes with influencers, some of them, they try. But I would say this comes with like a bigger headache of audits and things like that, right? So trying to avoid this, and if you're really willing to do it, then perfect. But otherwise, I would say escape from that.
Yeah, if you're a product team listening, I think you said something really helpful, which is how do you build assets in the game that can quickly be reskinned and used for this kinds of marketing? Many of the games I worked on, they would yell at me. They're like, Jen, it takes us 3 months to make a skin. We can't do that. Like, what's the ROI? How much am I going to make in doing this? And so, Marion, to your earlier example of like, you have to come in and show the math of why that deeper integration would work. And by the way, I know we spent some time on that. That isn't the only way. I mean, something else, you just going back, you mentioned gift links or QR codes or starter packs. I mean, those are insanely helpful as well. I mean, I use QR codes a ton, especially if you're doing anything in the Eastern market, you have to QR code pretty much everything. We covered a lot. Any final thoughts, Marion, from you? Anything that we might have missed or you want to just end on?
I would say, like, for anyone starting influence marketing or trying to scale it, I think it's really important for you to have a sort of framework so you really understand how you're testing influence marketing and what are the results that you want to get to, right? So everything starts with this sort of like knowledge gathering phase. And this is where you should be working with smaller size creators, right? Because that's when you can test a vast majority of influencers at a much smaller cost and gather a lot of learnings through that phase. And then once you're satisfied with the results, you move on to your optimization phase. You start leveraging, guest codes, guest links, giveaways and contests, and you work with bigger size creators. So if we talk about, for example, YouTube, like let's say up to 250,000 views, once you optimize your campaign, that's going to give you the reassurance that once you move to the bigger size creators, you're going to be more confident in spending a 5-figure budget, 6-figure budget on a single creators, and then spending more time and effort, like creating some in-game content for them. So it's all about like validating the verticals that are good for your app or your game before actually moving forward and going straight to the biggest integration and everything.
Oh, I like that. A step-by-step approach, I think, is really, really helpful for people just starting off. That makes sense. Sara, for you, any final thoughts?
Yeah, a bit related to what Maria said, but just to make sure you don't shoot yourself on the foot, and like when you want to try these things, just to make sure you have the proper setup in-house and that you align with everything that's happening in the game, avoid any seasonalities, avoid any weird movements on marketing budget, and just try to make sure that all these initial objectives that you have, that you can actually see them at the end of the campaign, and that not realizing things afterwards like, oh, but we had this at the same time. And now we cannot really see if it was successful or not. So just making sure like all these steps are very clear, and that this includes as well, like all the setup and how you're going to observe everything that's going to happen during the campaign.
So have a plan, get alignment on the plan. I do this by the way, with research as well, is I have to go to the product teams and I kind of have them read the questions and say, what would you do with the answer to this question? And they tell me, and that way when I come back with the results, they don't shit on it. So it's the same idea here is have a plan, get alignment on the plan and the methodology. If we get numbers that say this, what are we going to do? Do we agree that this is successful or not, that we're going to invest or not? And I think you have to map that whole process out with people so that they really understand what it is that you're going for and shooting for. So that makes a ton of sense. So Marion, you are an influencer consultant. So where can people reach out and learn more and work with you?
Yeah, of course. Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, Marion Balinoff. Reach out to me if you have any questions. If you're wondering about CPM conversion rate, anything, like I'm happy to help. Just reach out and we can hop on a call.
Amazing. And Sara, where can people find you at Media Bodies, a influencer and podcast agency?
Yes. So either Media Bodies website, or like you can also find me on LinkedIn or at sarah@mediabodies.com.
It's amazing that you have both sides, right? I always love to work with agency partners who have people on the inside who have gone to the light or the dark side and you've sat in my chair. So you understand what I am looking for. And I think that's always incredibly important. And again, what I thought was the reason why I wanted to talk to you, especially from the agency side, was this idea of podcast influencer marketing, in addition to just what we think is traditional, is a number of games are doing it. I mean, I've heard June's Journey ads, like myself. I know that it can also go across almost any genre as well. Actually, do you all work across all different genres, like even PC mobile games, in addition to like kind of more casual games?
Yeah, for sure. Like, again, it all depends on the vertical. Like podcasts, what we see is that we can go even more niche. So, for example, there's products that are very, very specific with a very, very specific audience, like or theme. And at the end of the day, podcasts, there are like hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there that fit this criteria. And so basically it's very useful for many people because then like you can also find like good quality users, right? Like for very niche verticals, maybe you don't find like the scalability that you're looking for, but you might find like
very
big
targeted.
waves. Yeah, like good whales.
Got it. Okay. Well, they'll see that on the website. Whatever is publicly available.
Exactly.
I'm sure is okay, and they'll see that on the website. But I do appreciate both of you coming on and sharing as much as you could. A lot of great data and insight tips and tricks. So thank you both, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Jen.
You did it. You made it to the end of the episode. As a fan of the show, it would help us out if you'd subscribe and leave us a review on the podcast service of your choice. Those stars and likes, while a small action on your part, mean a lot to us and help to grow the show. More importantly, are you a member of the Deconstructor of Fun Slack group? If you have 5 years or more of games industry experience, go to deconstructoroffun.com/Slack and apply to join. Join the games industry best professional community filled with peers always willing to lend a hand, or subscribe to our newsletter to get all the latest insights from the Deconstructor of Fun content creators. Thanks for listening.